A good Erev Shabbos. It's not really that fun to talk about, but it is really important. And once we get over the discomfort of talking about death and dying, we might sometimes feel that we have something of a load off our minds. We can articulate and express whatever anxiousness we may have inside. We can make our wishes and our values and our plans known. At some time or other, we will all go into that good night. How gently or not is a topic of debate. There's a very famous poem by Dylan Thomas that he wrote, perhaps as his own father was dying. Thomas wrote, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light, though wise men at their end know dark is right." We're caught between wanting those who are with us to stay with us a little bit longer and not wanting them to suffer pain or feel incapacitated. And of course, seeing people that we love preparing to die reminds us that one day it'll happen to us too. Why do we have so many expressions for death that avoid saying the actual word, whether it's pass away or pass on or final rest or something even less sensitive? Perhaps because death is unknown. Maybe it's a little bit scary. Maybe it provokes anxiety. So, just as the Torah teaches us ways to live, remember the Torah is from the word hora'ah, teaching. Torah has a lot to teach us about dying, this last stage of life in this world. Or, as the famous writer on death, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, put it, the final stage of growth, at least in this world. In a Sedra earlier in this Chumash, we had the death of Sarah, in a parsha called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. This week's portion is titled Vayechi, he lived. It starts, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. Rashi comments these were the best 17 years of his life, living with all his children reunited. Okay, that's even a different topic. But the fact is that Yaakov passes away in this parsha. And why doesn't it say Yaakov died? We have to explore that. Not only that, Joseph, who had been the hero, or at least the protagonist for the last quarter of the book of Genesis, also sees his life come to a close in this parsha. First, Yaakov's passing. As he senses his strength ebbing and the end of his life drawing near, Yaakov does not give up. He certainly does not seek to shuffle off this mortal coil any faster than need be, or to hasten dying in any form. As a model, an example, an inspiration to us, he's going to use every moment he has to make the most of his life. He calls his children together, he blesses them, even on his deathbed. Yes, he's still teaching, still giving brachas, still uplifting the spirits of his family to be the best that they can be, to maximize their potential. And we notice that it's not at all sappy. He's calling out those who need to be called out. Shimon and Levi, for example. Remember, a few parshas ago, they slaughtered an entire village in anger that their sister had been assaulted. Here, Yaakov reprimands them and chastises them for this. You should not have done that. It's pas nicht vardir. Such actions do not befit you. You can do better than that, he tells them. The rich and poetic language Yaakov uses to bless evokes the future of the Jewish people, leading some of the commentators to reflect on the extent to which these blessings may actually be prophecies. Ibn Ezra observes that when Yaakov blesses Yehuda with the strength of a lion, Binyamin with the appetite of a wolf, and Naphtali with the swiftness of a deer, Ibn Ezra wonders whether these blessings were just emphasized for the particular Shvatim, and everyone got all the same general brachas, or if it really was these particular qualities were to be associated with this or that particular tribe. There's a stronger argument to be made with, for example, Yehuda, that the scepter of sovereignty will never depart from that tribe. In any case, paying attention not so much to what was said and how, let's focus on the when, meaning that Yaakov did not give up for a minute while he still had breath in his body, didn't give up from doing all he could to influence his children and send them on the good path. He continued to teach, to bless, to inspire. It's an interesting insight into part of Ashrei, prayer which we say every day. The Gemara in Brachas Amud Dalid Gemara Brachas Dalid Amud Aleph told us that one who says Ashrei 3 times a day is certainly guaranteed a piece of Olam Haba. In that Psalm 145, verse 12 says, L'hoidia livnei hadam gvuroisav, which Art Scroll translates as God informing humankind of God's mighty deeds, which makes a lot of sense. But you can also read it as L'hoidia livnei hadam gvuroisav, to make people aware of their own strengths, the things that they are capable of achieving. This is why Yaakov sought to utilize, maximize these last breaths of his life. He was urging his kids until his last moment to recognize their own strength and capacity. Now, why are we making such a big deal over emphasizing the last phase, the very last phase of life? You probably guessed it already. It's because we forfeit all this power and this insight and inspiration and alignment of our beliefs and our actions when we devalue the end of life. And that is what is happening in the world all around us. It's not clear at all where the peak point is, but it's clear as day that the point where life is no longer worth living is moving earlier and earlier in the trajectory of a person's life, according to popular opinion, according to Canadian law, and according to the arrogant, triumphant march of the medical assistance in dying movement, which has already been out of control for a long time, and who knows how and when we'll be able to put that genie back in the bottle. Used to be that MAID was for terminal patients near the end of life. Now it's not just for terminal sickness. Now it's even for mental problems. And who dares predict what's still to come? We are in trouble with this one, and the Jewish people have to remain extra vigilant on guarding the sanctity of life, as we always have done. The National Association of Chevra Kadisha, NASC, always asks rabbis to speak about end-of-life issues, wills and estates, funeral planning and medical ethics issues, with particular focus on this very special Shabbos, where we see so clearly how our patriarchs approach death without fear, without superstition, without anxiety. They returned their souls to their Maker in due course, but while they were alive, they lived. They did not, God forbid, seek to end life a moment or a second before its time. In fact, we see something a little strange and very insightful in our portion this week. In the last verse of chapter 49, it says that when Jacob finished instructing his sons, Vayechi Yaakov letzavos es banav, it says he drew his feet onto the bed. V'yasayf raglav al hamita, v'yigva v'yasef el amav. He expired and was gathered to his people. It does not use the word died. He died. It doesn't say that. Gemara in Tainus makes a big deal out of this. It says Yaakov Avinu lo meis. Perhaps Jacob didn't die at all. It's a big commentary on this in your Art Scroll Chumash. You can take a look on page 284 when you have a moment. One thing it says to us is that the precise moment of the end of life is ambiguous. It's hard to determine. It's not entirely clear the moment when life ends and the soul departs the body. So how much more do we have to regard every moment of life as precious and valuable? The notes to Rashi there cite the comment of Rasisei Laila, which is Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin, say that for a person as refined as Yaakov Avinu, as Jacob, the soul divesting itself of its material body was no more traumatic an event than it is for us to take off one garment and put on another. Again, we tend to project our fears and anxieties onto others and assume that they must be as jumpy as we are. So tragically, in Canada, perhaps soon in the UK, Chief Rabbi Mervis mentioned this when he visited last month, it's legal to have the medical profession end your life before its time. So that we make no mistakes or errors of judgment, let me be as clear as I can about this. Medical assistance in dying is absolutely forbidden according to Jewish law. There are no circumstances under which a Jew or anyone acting on their behalf can authorize a doctor, a nurse, a technician, anyone, to hasten or bring about their death for any reason. Please mention this to your friends, your family. If you've discussed it with your own doctor and you need to change your instructions about what to do it tomorrow, after Shabbos. Don't wait. This is one of the great tragedies, one of the huge mistakes of our time. And again, it will be very hard to reverse this process. But no maid for any reason ever. Any questions, please speak to me. I'm ready at any time to have this conversation. While we're on the topic of end of life planning, let's mention also that all the phases of dying, burial, mourning, and so on can be thought about and to a greater or lesser extent planned in advance. There's even a service that will say Kaddish for a person for every day, for a year, forever on their yahrzeit, or both for a small fee if that's a concern. Either of the Jewish funeral homes in town have dedicated staff ready to help us pre-plan a funeral, so the burden of that concern is removed from family and friends after our passing, and the bereaved will not be faced with making 2 or 3 dozen difficult decisions in the midst of the pain of bereavement. NASC asks the rabbis to mention that cremation is forbidden. Seems to be a bigger issue in the US than it is here, along with leaving our remains to science. We are against autopsy in almost all cases, and we've had to fight a few battles in recent years, but we're usually able to bury a person's remains with all the dignity and love that we all deserve. But look how many times in these parshas one of the characters makes their children swear an oath not to bury them in Egypt. At one point, say the Mefarshim, Pharaoh would not have allowed removal of remains from Egypt, of Jacob's remains for burial, to be buried in Israel, except for the oath that Yaakov had made Yosef swear at the outset of Parshas Vayechi. See, for those worried about the law of the land is the law, Dina de Malchus Adina, we have to follow the laws of the land that we're in. Remember that Jewish law always has the final say. Medrash and Talmud Yerushalmi make a connection between Yaakov Avinu, between Jacob and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the prince. As Yaakov spent the last 17 years of his life inspiring his family, Rabbi Yehuda spent the balance of his life compiling the Mishnah, the basic text of rabbinic Judaism that we study at the beginning and the end of every prayer service. Not for a moment did Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or Rebbe, as we call him affectionately, did he consider that he didn't have any more to give. He didn't have something to contribute, even with the closing chapters, the last years of his life. The entire course of Jewish history comes from Jews not giving up, even in the most dire circumstances. That's the value we have always placed on life. And even though Parshas Vayechi ends with 2 deaths, what this Parsha and this whole Chumash have to teach us about how sacred life is, every moment of it, to the very last, should continue to inspire us now, this Shabbos, this week, and on far into the future. Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom.